On the land that would become TPC Sawgrass, alligators stored their prey in pits covered by thick vegetation. One day, during the long and arduous process to build the golf course, two men on the construction staff fell into one of those pits. The stench overwhelmed their senses. Fear consumed them. They raced to climb out. Above ground and safe from imminent danger, one of the men, still spooked, took off in a dead sprint, not to be seen for the rest of the day. This is the story of how an uninhabitable swampland became the permanent home of the PGA Tour's flagship event.
They wore snake boots and the sawgrass was up to their hips. They carried machetes and were following, deer prints to get around in there.
It's a story about the resistance and skepticism of so many and the ambition and intellect of one man.
Most of the players had this negativity about Deane Beman is too much of a dictator ruler and he's not allowing the players to have their say. The reality of it is he was smarter than all the players.
This is the making of the players. I'm Craig Kann. To understand why PGA Tour Commissioner Deane Beman wanted to build a permanent home for the players, it's important to understand Deane Beman.
I tend to think about things as they could be, not as they are. When I became commissioner in 1974, total prize money for the year was something like $8.1 million, total prize money for the entire year for all players. Golf was a minor sport, and I thought that golf could be and should be a major sport.
Beman knew what he wanted the tour to become, and he had the business savvy and competitive fire to get it done. It helped that he wasn't just some out-of-touch, pushy executive who didn't understand the players. He was a player. Like Jack Nicklaus, Beman won the U.S. Amateur twice, and he captured 4 PGA Tour titles in a 5-year span before becoming commissioner in 1974. He had talent, but more than that, he was tough. Historian Bill Fields from the Albatross newsletter explains.
I played golf with Beman back in, I believe it was 2004 up in Maine where he summered. I'm 6'2", over 200 pounds. And Beman said, if I'd been your size, they might not have ever heard of Jack Nicklaus. And, he wasn't totally joking because, he was just a very tenacious and a formidable opponent, whether you were dealing with him on the golf course or in a boardroom. Gary McCord told me one time that, people thought Beman was tenacious, but he said they didn't know how tenacious he really was. In McCord's words, he had teeth, serious teeth.
Jerry Pate, the 1976 U.S. Open champion, witnessed that tenacity firsthand as a member of the tour's policy board.
Deane was brilliant how he put the PGA Tour together. And it was not always good because there were always people shooting arrows at the commissioner because he was challenging the envelope to try to move the Players' Championship to the next level. He was moving the organization to the next level.
No one can speak about Beman's vision to create a permanent home for the players with more clarity than his biographer, Adam Schupak.
When I think about the things that he did to get this project created, I think back to this great quote from Jerome Fletcher, who sold the land for $1 to Deane. And he said Deane Beman was like a grandmaster chess player. He was always 3 moves ahead. That really does personify Deane, and he had the vision. He knew that what this could mean to the PGA Tour, and he was going to do whatever it took to make it happen.
It's also important to understand the stature of the players before it moved to TPC Sawgrass. Beginning with the inaugural event in 1974, it was held at 3 different venues: Atlanta Country Club, Colonial Country Club, and Inverrary Country Club, all of which already hosted other annual PGA Tour events. Quite simply, the Players was an interloper.
The initial idea for the Players' Championship was it was almost going to be this prize for the best tournaments. They would get to host the Tournament Players' Championship as well as their event. So one of the early ones was at Colonial, and Deane figured this was going to be, something that would mean a lot to them. But it turned out that it was more important to put on their event. That was what was part of the fabric of their community and mattered to them. And so having this second event was kind of cool, but didn't have quite the same significance. So he thought, I got to bring this to one place and make it special in one spot.
I thought the best way to get the tournament at a higher level was to hold it in the same place every year, so that people who actually couldn't come to the event would be familiar with what they're seeing year after year.
First, Beeman pursued a partnership with an existing tournament, the Florida Citrus Open, which had an affiliation with the game's most popular player, Arnold Palmer. But tournament organizers didn't want to give up their name and identity, so Beeman kept looking. Then, in March of 1976, during the Greater Jacksonville Open, Beeman and his 13-year-old son were looking for a place to play. Someone recommended a course on the northeast coast of Florida, Sawgrass Country Club.
By the time he got to the fourth hole and saw the ocean in the background, he said, wow, this is a special place. And he kind of cut off the round early, I think at the turn, drove back to meet with the tournament organizer, said, what do you think? I have this germ of an idea that maybe we could turn the Greater Jacksonville Open into the permanent home of the Players' Championship. And they said, let's talk about that. And so that was kind of the genesis of the Players' Championship coming to Jacksonville.
From the Sawgrass Country Club in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, CBS Sports presents the 1981 Tournament Players' Championship.
Sawgrass Country Club did host it for a few years, beginning in 1977, I believe, through 81.
Lee Trevino, the winner of the Tournament Players' Championship.
But the reason it didn't work out as the permanent home was Dean was trying to purchase the golf course. And in the process of doing that, going through the board meetings and stuff, a real estate company swooped in and bought the property outright. And so Dean was trying to negotiate the sale of just the golf course and said, this will be a win-win deal. We're going to bring the tournament here. It's going to bring all sorts of publicity and promotion, and your real estate's going to go up in value because of that. The real estate owners would not budge on selling the property. They didn't feel comfortable that Dean would do this. And even as Dean threatened to move the tournament elsewhere, the thought from the real estate company was, it'll never happen. You'll never get your board to agree to it.
Chuck Cobb, the chairman of Arvida, the real estate company negotiating with Beeman, was right. The PGA Tour Board didn't support Beeman's plans to purchase Sawgrass Country Club. In their view, the tour's mandate was to operate golf tournaments, not own golf courses. Beeman had been beaten, but he wasn't defeated. Vernon Kelly, Beeman's indispensable project manager who would oversee construction of TPC Sawgrass, explains what happened next.
So Dean at that point said, well, then I'm going to go build my own golf course. And there's a good story behind that, because at that point, Chuck Cobb challenged Dean and said, you just tried to buy this golf course, your board wouldn't let you. Why do you think they'll let you build your own golf course? I'll bet you $100 you'll never build a golf course. And Dean happened to have $100 and put it on the table and said, call. And then that ended that meeting.
That was his way of saying, we're going to do this. I mean business. We're going to find a way. And he did.
Fate or serendipity would play a role. Jerome and Paul Fletcher, real estate developers in the Ponte Vedra area, owned more than 5,000 acres near Sawgrass Country Club, west of A1A, the state road that runs parallel to the Atlantic Ocean. The Fletchers heard that Beeman was looking for a place to build a golf course, so they called him. Soon, Beeman visited the property with Paul Fletcher and Vernon Kelly, who at the time worked for the Fletcher Corporation.
This was a good location. The property was beautiful. It had incredible tree cover. It had good access, but it was a horrendous construction project because it had a lot of drainage problems.
It was basically a swamp. It was as flat as a pancake. They had a lot of work to do, but Dean had the vision, and he saw that, even though this land didn't look like great property for a great golf course, that this was going to be the future for the PGA Tour. Dean eventually goes back to these landowners and says, I think we might be interested. And they offered him 415 acres of land for the princely sum of $1.
415 acres for $1, a bargain by any measure. Beeman presented the offer to his board, and they decided to take the unusual step of having the tour's players vote on it.
And Dean was enraged by this, couldn't believe that he was going to have to allow the players to vote on it. This had never happened before on a business decision. And so what he did was he went out campaigning like he was running for office and went to various tournaments over the next several months, and he met with players at inopportune times, 6, 7 a.m. in the morning, in the middle of when most of the players were on the course during practice rounds, because he wanted to meet with small groups so he could give special attention, answer all their questions if they had them.
Jerry Pate attended those meetings and still has the original 51-page prospectus that Beeman presented to the players.
His whole sales pitch was, we're going to build this golf course. It's going to be low maintenance. Won't cost any money to maintain. It's going to have all these native areas, and it's going to be really a great home for the PGA Tour. We're going to be able to build an affordable clubhouse, blah, blah, blah. But Dean had to sell it on we weren't going to spend a lot of money, because I'm just telling you, we didn't have a lot of money. I would bet you in 1975, when I got my card, the Tour didn't have $2 million in the bank, maybe not even that much.
And eventually, when it was time to vote, he got the 12 or so players that he knew were supportive of the project to be the first ones to vote. So when players came to jot their name down on yes or no, all they saw were the names of the players on the yes side.
The sheep followed the shepherds, Beeman said. And when the results of the vote came in, he could hardly contain his excitement.
If we were in any political contest, we'd call this a landslide. Of the 103 members who voted, 100 of the members voted in favor of building the Players Club here in Jacksonville at Inlet Beach.
Beeman had prevailed, but just as he was about to complete the deal with the Fletchers, he said that he wanted something else, or rather someone else, Vernon Kelly, their business partner.
He said, I want Vernon to come to work and build it for me, which changed my life. I mean, it was a wonderful thing as it worked out. And I left the Fletchers on a 1-year leave of absence to build the course, and took 2 years. I thought it was going to take forever.
On February 1st, 1979, the PGA Tour made out check number 12302 to Fletcher Land Corporation for $1.00. Beeman, at long last, secured the land for his golf course. Now, he needed to find someone to build it. On February 12, 1979, the PGA Tour and Commissioner Dean Beeman held a groundbreaking ceremony on the land that would become TPC Sawgrass and the Tour's headquarters. Adam Schupak, Beeman's biographer, explains the significance of that moment.
Dean Beeman dug into his closet and pulled out an old McGregor Ben Hogan driver to hit the ceremonial first shot, and he kind of necked it. So he went and grabbed a mulligan, and that one, he said, he hit it on the screws. Then he climbed onto a Caterpillar and dug in for the first scoop, and I think he even knocked over a few saplings, and the project was off and running.
To build the golf course, Beeman selected Pete Dye, one of the game's acclaimed designers and eccentric thinkers. The first time he laid eyes on golf's most hallowed ground, the old course at St. Andrews, he proclaimed it to be nothing more than a goat ranch. The second golf course he ever built only had 17 holes, not by design, but because, as Dye says, he didn't know what the hell he was doing.
All I was doing was running around trying to get the thing built. And I said, you mean to tell me we only got 17 holes out there?
But Dye learned his craft by studying renowned designer Robert Trent Jones, and freely admitted that he copied many of Jones's philosophies. Yet when Dye was asked to design Harbortown golf links in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina, he figured it was time to follow his own instincts. When he completed the course in 1969, Sports Illustrated called it nothing short of a work of art. The layout became a favorite among many of the players on tour, including Dean Beeman, who believed that the similarities between Harbortown and the course he envisioned made Dye his ideal partner.
I was a Pete Dye fan. I was a Hilton Head fan of that golf course. Similar property, low property, right on the coastline, dead flat, and I was very impressed by what he'd done there. I thought it was the right pick.
Of course, I was elated when he called me and talked to me about building this golf course. But you know it'd be in the eyes of the public for years and years to come. It was the greatest thing in my life, to tell you the truth.
Dye traveled to Jacksonville and toured the site with Beeman and Vernon Kelly. Afterwards, they had dinner at the Homestead, a popular fried chicken joint. Here's Kelly.
They were sitting at the table tossing back ideas.
I remember Dean saying that he wanted 10 and 1, very similar, only the opposite.
And then started talking about the finishing holes and said, I want 3 finishing holes that create a lot of drama.
He tried to conceptually put everything together.
Pete said, you mean like this? And he picked up a napkin and starts making a sketch.
The napkin was actually a placemat. Dye pushed it in front of Beeman, who looked him square in the eye with a knowing smile. Here again, Adam Shupak.
That placemat's now framed, and you can see it in the clubhouse. It's pretty cool that it all started right then and there at that dinner over some Southern fried chicken.
Beeman wanted the course to be challenging, but just as importantly, he wanted it to be accommodating for spectators.
When Dean first became commissioner, he went to the Phoenix Open, and it was the first time he'd been at a tournament as a spectator since he was in high school. And what he found was how difficult it was to view the golf. He walked around, he's not a tall guy, he's 5'7", and he was having to crane his neck. Fans were packed in 10 deep at the 9th green. The most popular memorabilia item was to purchase a periscope, a paper periscope, so that you could view the golf. And Dean walked around and he thought, why would anyone come out here and walk 5 miles? You don't know who's leading. You don't know what's happening. You can hardly see. He said, I got to do something to make golf more spectator friendly, because he knew smaller crowds meant smaller purses.
Beeman envisioned a new experience that he called stadium golf, which would cater to the spectator. From their first conversation, Dye was on board.
He understood that in the routing of the holes that I wanted, areas for spectators so that they wouldn't have to walk all 18 holes to really see a lot of golf. What I called areas of activities, so that somebody could walk a couple of 100 yards and maybe see a couple of tee shots, a couple second shots, and a couple of greens. And he liked that from a standpoint of a golf course being built for a golf tournament.
And we took into great consideration, Dean did, he had talked about it at length, about where the spectators would be sitting on the right side of the fairway so that they would look at the faces of the players when they played golf. He wanted a golf course, and then he just wanted to have the side where people could watch the game.
Dye dutifully followed Beeman's vision, but he would not, or could not, be constrained by convention, as Vernon Kelly witnessed early on.
We had to get a set of plans for the bank in order to secure the financing. I was after him for months to do that. He didn't want to give us a set of plans. Finally gave us a set of plans, and the bank was satisfied and approved the loan. And so the first day out on the job, I was walking out with him and I forgot something. I ran back to the truck and got the plans, came running back out. Pete said, "What's that?" I said, "These are the plans." And he said, "Put them back in that truck. I don't want to see them again." That was the end of the plans.
On this journey of 1,000 miles, the first step was one of the most challenging.
When you first build a golf course, the first thing you do is have the surveyor come out and mark the tees, landing areas, and the greens. And then he'll do a cut line between those points. It usually cut it with a machete on our property, and it's maybe 5 feet wide. And it was exhausting to do that. We're out in the middle of the swamp or the bog. The water's up to here in some places, and bugs like crazy, and snakes that you got to watch out for.
Historian Bill Fields from the Albatross Newsletter.
There was a little bit of everything on the site, from alligators to poisonous snakes, rattlesnakes, water moccasins. One worker, a surveyor, was bitten by a water moccasin in a ditch one day as he traversed the property. There were several close calls with rattlers. I went in depth on this topic some years back for a story, and one of the people that I talked to was Dave Postlewaite, who is the chief foreman of the construction crew. And one of the things he told me was that the crew, himself included, would have swimming races in the ponds, including the pond by the 18th. And you just have to imagine that there were snakes and alligators in that water. And but it's free-spirited crew, and that's what they did after a long, hot day of work. They cooled off with a dip in the pond.
The property, effectively a low-lying swamp, made draining water off the land an exercise in ingenuity. To the east, Highway A1A acted as a dam, keeping water in. So Dye and his team constructed what amounted to a moat around the perimeter that was connected to a series of canals and lakes. The system worked and provided the drainage they so desperately needed. But that tedious process and the delays caused by unexpected weather made Dye openly wonder if they'd ever get, quote, this damn place done, and stretch Vernon Kelly and his staff to their limit.
There were times when I was signing checks for people that had over 100 hours, and I was here more than they were. It was a job where you just put one foot in front of the other, because it just seemed like every time you'd get a little bit ahead, the weather would come in. We had 200-year storms and a hurricane during the 2-year period we built this course. And every time you'd have that kind of weather, you'd go back several months and have to kind of start again.
Mercifully, the crew began to make progress. An endless array of machines graded the course. An army of workers tiled the greens. And Dye constructed beam and spectator mounds by piling more than 150,000 cubic yards of leaves, trash, and other material near the fairways, greens, and tees. One mound on the 9th hole was created by burying a broken down truck that is still there to this day.
So one day, archaeologists will probably find that, and the story will evolve about how golf courses were built incorporating pickup trucks.
Another happy accident occurred during the creation of the stadium course's signature hole, the par 3 17th, and its famed Island Green.
It happened to be that at the location of 17, there was a huge amount of sand, and that was used to build 18 and 16 and several other holes, and we just kept stealing the sand from that.
And took all the sand out, every grain of it, to tell you the truth. And all of a sudden, we didn't have a hole. We just had didn't have a golf hole. We had a hole, a real hole in the ground. Finally, my bride of some now 51 years, Alice, came in and said, why don't you just put some of the organic back and put a wall around it and make an island green? So that's how the 17th hole started. So all you people can blame it on my bride rather than on me.
Maybe we should give her credit. The 17th, bracketed by the risk-reward par 5 16th, and the dramatic par 4 18th, fulfilled Beeman's vision to create a memorable and pivotal finishing stretch.
A player can go 2 birdies and a par, and he'll pick up 6 shots on the fellow that just went double bogey par or something like that. It's amazing how the change can be the last 3 or 4 holes.
As the course neared completion, Dye still needed to clear wild underbrush throughout the property. With a limited budget already stretched thin, he outsourced the task to a group that came cheap. Historian Bill Fields from the Albatross Newsletter explains.
Pete Dye knew a farmer that had some goats set loose and really took care of a lot of underbrush because, they've got those 4-chambered stomachs, and they can, consume just about any kind of vegetation. And they did what they were brought in to do. They cleared about, 80% of the underbrush that, beyond the fairways that had to get cleared out. The goats did it.
Here's PGA Tour Commissioner Deane Beman.
The final chapter of the goats was one of the small ones was pulled in a lake by an alligator right in front of the clubhouse where people were sitting there watching lunch.
The women are screaming and everybody's upset, and all of a sudden he pops up and starts, swimming frantically for the side. Everybody's cheering for the goat, and the alligator's coming for the goat, but he made it up. Everybody was so traumatized we gathered up the goats and found a good home for them.
The players got their first glimpse of the course during the 1980 Players. After the second round, Tom Watson and Leonard Thompson made the short drive from Sawgrass Country Club and were astonished by what they saw. As Watson said, "We looked at each other and said, how could anybody design greens like this?" Ben Crenshaw played all 18 holes and shot 76. Crenshaw added, "It's Star Wars golf. The place was designed by Darth Vader." Here's Beeman biographer Adam Shupak.
It was very different and penal. The word kind of got out that what's Dean doing there? What's he doing in this, turning this swamp into a golf course? That was something that, I don't think Dean expected at the time.
It was pretty much determined the greens were too severe. Pete had overdone a Pete Dye golf course. So we went out in that year before the tournament was actually held here and modified a number of the greens substantially. And so from our standpoint, when they were so severe and we modified them to not be so severe in our mind, well, they were going to be okay.
At 9 a.m. on Friday, October 24th, 1980, a bagpiper led a group of dignitaries into the clubhouse at TPC Sawgrass for the grand opening ceremony. Beeman spoke last after a lengthy and well-deserved applause.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, this is indeed a big day for me and a big day for golf. I think with this golf course, we are seeing the beginning of stadium golf. Out here to the left, there's the 18th hole that I believe 40,000 people will be able to watch every stroke of the champion that wins the TPC. So with all this, I'd like to dedicate to all players of the PGA Tour whose excellence and integrity in competition are the standard by which all players are measured. This facility is dedicated this October 24th. Thank you.
About 60 golfers played on the new course, including two-time U.S. Open champion Hale Irwin. Among those also going out on the new course, architect Pete Dye. Dye was asked by our own Matt Cooney what he had in mind when he designed the course.
We'll make it hard.
Fittingly, Beeman concluded the course's grand opening in style. He hit a fairway wood to 3 feet on the 18th hole to finish birdie. Although TPC Sawgrass was ready for play, it still needed time to mature. The tour planned to delay relocating the players until 1982. In that time, Jerry Pate made multiple trips to the course and played several times with Beeman, who shared what he knew about Dye's design.
Dean said, "Listen, this is a very deceiving golf course off the tee, the way Pete is designed. A lot of blind tee shots and you don't really know exactly where to hit it.
You stand at the tee and it looks like you have very little room to hit your tee shot, when in fact when you get down there, you have quite a bit of room. If you're aggressive off the tee, you'll give yourself a lot easier shots into the greens."
And he said, "If you'll just listen to me and follow my lead," he says, "you can win this thing."
In March of 1982, at long last, the stadium course at TPC Sawgrass was ready for its close-up. On Tuesday of tournament week, the tour hosted a dinner for the players in the new clubhouse. Commissioner Dean Beeman used the occasion to unveil the Players' Championship's Waterford Crystal Trophy, which featured a silhouette of a golfer. Jerry Pate took one glance at the golfer and noticed a striking resemblance.
I walked over and looked at the trophy, picked it up, and I looked at it. It had a guy on the trophy that was etched in there in the crystal with the palm trees behind the 18th green, and he was putting. It was a silhouette of a golfer. And I looked at it, and it was my silhouette off of a picture from me. Same putter, same stance, same everything. I walked back over and sat down with my wife. I said, "You're not going to believe this." I said, "That's me on that trophy." The tradesman that carved that in there, the artist, they had to have used somebody's picture. I told my wife, I said, I'm gonna win that trophy because that's me on that trophy.
During Thursday's first round, as Pete Dye made his way around the golf course, he wondered if fans would embrace Beeman's concept of stadium golf. On the 18th hole, several thousand people watched play while sitting comfortably on the spectator mounds near the green. Dye had his answer. 3 players shared the opening round lead at 5 under. J.C. Snead shot 72 and told the media afterward he believed Beeman and Dye, quote, messed up a perfectly good swamp. This course, he says, is 90% manure and 10% luck. Beeman biographer Adam Schupak adds more.
The players, they called it Star Wars golf. Jack Nicklaus referred to, some of the greens as like trying to land a 4-iron on a Volkswagen. There was a lot of talk that what has Dean done? What has Dean and Pete Dye, what have they created?
One columnist predicted that the par 3 17th hole and its treacherous island green would become the most notorious short hole in America. Mark Calcavecchia compared it to a 3 p.m. root canal, saying, quote, all day you know it's coming, but it doesn't make it any easier when it's finally time to confront it. At 8:59 a.m. on Thursday morning, Dave Thor hit the first ball into the water during tournament play. Someone sarcastically congratulated him. Thank you, Thor said. After I put my next shot on, I was the first ever to 3-putted in competition, end quote. On that day alone, 20 players would find the water, confirming Beeman's suspicion that a short shot did not make for an easy shot.
I played the golf course a number of times before the first tournament was held, maybe 30, 40, 50 times, and a pretty easy hole if it doesn't mean anything. You got up there with a wedge or a 9-iron, hit it on the green, and go to the next tee. It wasn't a big deal. It looks pretty simple, but under the circumstances that players put themselves in to have a chance of winning the tournament, it becomes a key, small little hole that's really key to their success.
Jack Nicklaus, Arnold Palmer, and Gary Player all missed the cut. Lee Trevino opened with 82 and didn't turn in his scorecard the next day. 6 players held a share of the 36-hole lead. Jerry Pate trailed by 5.
CBS Sports proudly presents the TPA Tour from the Tournament Players Club at Sawgrass in Ponte Vedra, Florida.
At 4:30 p.m. on Saturday afternoon, CBS began their broadcast of the 3rd round. For many Americans watching at home, this was their first glimpse of TPC Sawgrass.
With us at 18, United States Open champion Ken Venturi. And Ken, the natural question would be, what are your impressions of the course?
Well, it's been praised, it's been criticized, Ben, and I don't think anyone's ever built a golf course that everybody liked all 18 holes. But great golf courses are like great players. They must stand the test of time. And to win here, you're going to have all the shots, and you also have to be an excellent putter.
Tom Watson shot the low round of the day, a 68, then promptly criticized the course design and setup, saying, quote, the pin placements are stupid. The greens so severe, they're unfair. They really should be changed, and I'd be happy to drive the bulldozer. By day's end, Jerry Pate trailed by 3, despite a double bogey on the final hole. His brother-in-law, Bruce Litsky, held a share of the lead.
Well, with that, let's check the leaderboard as we go into the final round of the inaugural Tournament Players Championship at the Tournament Players Club.
So we come around to Sunday, and I mean, Dean is catching so much heat, and so is Pete. They're wanting to fire Dean. That's the talk in the locker room. We got no business owning a golf course. The commissioner needs to get fired. He's lost his mind. Pete Dye is the worst architect ever in the history of golf architecture. Nobody can play the course. It's unfair. It's diabolical, blah, blah, blah. And I'm right near the lead, and I birdie 12. And I'm walking from 12 to 13, and I hear these little metal spikes going click, 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 and it's Alice Dye. She comes up and grabs me by the hand. She says, you got to win this thing and throw Pete in the lake. And I said, Alice, I'm going to win, and I'm going to throw him in.
Pate birdied the treacherous par 3 17th, making a slick downhill putt on the famous island green that Alice Dye persuaded her husband to build. Not more than 100 yards away, on the reachable par 5 16th, Litsky made a crucial bogey.
Looks good.
So the saddest words of tongue and pen, those that read what might have been, and you can put Bruce Litsky in that category.
So I take the lead, and then I go to the 18th hole and drive it right in the middle of the fairway.
And you can see that perfect drive. He swung that from right to left, and you couldn't waltz that out there any better.
Pate's tee shot left him with 175 yards to the hole, a perfect 5-iron, his favorite club. A day earlier, he hit the same club from the same distance into the water, but not today.
Well, what can you say?
Pate stuffed his approach inside 2 feet to clinch the tournament and survive Deane Beman and Pete Dye's diabolical layout. Now, he intended to show his gratitude in his own unique way.
Jerry Pate had dove into the water when he won and ended a long winless streak a year earlier in 1981 in Memphis. And so that had kind of become a signature celebratory thing for him. And so when he hit a beautiful 5-iron to about 2 feet on the final hole in 1982, and he was the guy who had conquered, Pete Dye's great creation here, he looked in the camera and said,
Pete Dye will go for a swim today.
As we got up and he was finishing, I became aware that he also had his eyes on me.
You think I ought to throw the commissioner in?
Why not?
Pate tapped in for birdie and a final round 67, the low round of the weekend. His reward, a $90,000 payday, and more importantly, a 10-year exemption.
And atop the heap, an Open champion, Pensacola's Jerry Pate is the winner of the inaugural Tournament Players Championship at the Tournament Players Club.
After we're waiting for the television to go to commercial, when we were setting up for the ceremony, we walked over to the edge of 18. I said, Pete, you got to see this bulkhead. It's about to fall in. He said, you're kidding. I said, no, it's going to fall in. So he, being concerned about his golf hole, walks over there, and I grabbed him and threw him in, and here comes Deane, and I throw him in behind me.
Would you like to see perhaps the wildest moment in the history of any professional sport, particularly when you realize of the dignity? There goes the commissioner. Deane Beman pushed in the 18th by Jerry Pate. That splash was Pete Dye, and last is Jerry Pate. If that isn't right out of Hell's a Poppin' or Animal House or you name it, unbelievable. And the backstroke of Deane Beman for the 1984 Olympic team.
So when we jumped in, we were all sitting there, and the people are going crazy. And I remember Deane laying on his back doing sort of the dog paddle on his back, or just kind of floating, and he spit some water up through his mouth.
I ended up getting the flu and was sick for a long time after that, as a matter of fact.
He got sick from drinking the water and spitting it up like a fountain. But he was so excited because it took the heat off of everyone. They finally realized this was just recreation and entertainment. This is not brain surgery to build a golf course or to play a golf championship. People should have fun. People should enjoy it. People are paying good money to see theater, and that was theater at its best.
Dye, dripping wet, walked off the 18th green and made the short trek to the golf shop and charged a pair of tan slacks and a shirt to Beman. They both then joined Pate at the trophy presentation.
The first thing to do, I think, is to say congratulations to the new champion, Jerry Pate.
Thank you very much, Pat. It's really an honor, and this is one of the first times that I don't have much to say. But I do want to say that stadium golf is fantastic, and I want to commend Commissioner Beman. I've said a lot of things about him under my breath this week, but it's the greatest feeling in the world to come down the 18th hole here and the course that he and Pete Dye built, and to have the cheer and applause from all the fans. It's just the greatest feeling in the world.
Commissioner Deane Beman next to him, and the man who designed the layout next to him, Pete Dye. Deane, you deserve just an awful lot of credit.
Pat, I appreciate it. We set out some 4 or 5 years ago to build a golf course for the fans. We knew that we were going to have trouble with the players when we did that. Normally, week to week on the tour, you see competition between players. And you saw a struggle between these gentlemen in this golf course. And it's a formidable foe and one that doesn't give up. And, of course, Jerry, those shots that he hit coming down the stretch were fantastic. A great amount of courage. My hat's off to him, some player.
The man next to you, some designer. This is Pete Dye. And, Pete, how do you feel? Well, you've got a lot of grateful fans, obviously, here. Pete, how do you feel about the comments, the criticism, and there has been some about your golf course?
Well, I think it's great to be here, and I'm glad Jerry won because now he has 10 more years to come back. And but there's bound to be some criticism, and I'm happy they didn't say it was too easy or too flat.
Surely somebody has that check for $90,000 for Jerry Pate, don't they?
The check must be wet.
Oh, the check is wet. I'm sorry. Well, you already got it.
I had it with me, and it was in my pocket. It's Jerry. There it is over there.
The dramatic and entertaining finish captivated the golf world. Sports Illustrated columnist Dan Jenkins wrote, quote, "If all this doesn't make TPC a major championship, then Jerry Pate, Dean Beman, and Pete Dye can't swim a stroke." But many of the players didn't share that sentiment, and they soon directed their discontent at the source of their frustration, Pete Dye. After winning the inaugural Players' Championship at TPC Sawgrass in 1982, Jerry Pate joked that he would gladly donate his $90,000 first place prize to Pete Dye so that he could remodel the greens. Pate was half joking. Many other players were not. During the week of the 1983 tournament, their criticism of Dye's design reached a boiling point. It became so intense that Dye thought the players, quote, wanted to kill me. Mark McCumber described it as a mutiny. Tom Weiskopf equated the course to playing Donkey Kong. Their main complaint, the severity of the greens. And shortly after the 1983 championship, Dye toured the course with a committee of players. Hole by hole they went. It was a grill and roast session, said Bobby Weed, Dye's right-hand man, who oversaw the renovations. Dye, protective of his work, resisted initially, but relented eventually. The players, after all, did own the golf course. Once their recommendations were made, the players, Tom Watson among them, at long last gave the course their seal of approval.
Well, I think it was the appropriate thing to have a great golf course for a great tournament. In 2 years, they had to redesign all the greens because they built it too tough. They literally built it too tough. All the greens were redesigned and flattened. And once they did that, the golf course was playable and it was fun to play.
Adam Schupak, Dean Beman's biographer.
But it has stood the test of time, and the fact that the players go back every year there, everybody knows it, kind of like the back of their hand, and there's so many great memories of famous shots there.
Be the right club today. Yes!
Hal Sutton is the Players' champion again.
I think that's what makes it so special.
Historian Bill Fields from the Albatross newsletter.
The stadium course really has established a true identity over the decades. Casual fans know it. The finish is well known, 16, 17, and 18.
Well, we're back at the 17th, and what a scene it is. Galleries surrounding. Many have been here. I was out here at 9 o'clock this morning looking at the whole location, and people were already claiming spots.
You know, it's really developed into exactly what Beman hoped it would. He's got to be very proud when the Players is held. A lot of people doubted that even if that course could get built, and not only was it built, but it's become a real institution in golf.
It is better than most. Better than most!
When Beman became commissioner, he set out to transform the game into a major sport. The development of TPC Sawgrass fast-tracked his efforts.
TPC Sawgrass became such a huge success that it led to a whole network of courses, and it really changed design. It was significant for making spectator-friendly courses more popular, and the PGA Tour expanded this notion of having spectator-friendly courses and also owning its own facilities so that it could build facilities that could host big events. And so these days there are several PGA Tour events and Champions Tour events that are held at TPC courses throughout the U.S.
You know, it all got its start that March day in '82 when Pate was at the top of the leaderboard and jumped in the water in celebration.
Dean Beman pushed in the 18th by Jerry Pate. That splash was Pete Dye, and And last is Jerry Pate. If that isn't right out of Hell's a Poppin' or Animal House or you name it. Commissioner Dean Beeman on the left, the architect Pete Dye on the right, and the champion Jerry Pate all in the drink. Unbelievable.
Dean Beeman, Pete Dye, and Jerry Pate will forever be linked by the 1982 players. For one glorious week, their lives intersected on what would become one of the grandest stages in all of golf. Despite the initial criticism about his work, Dye considered his association with TPC Sawgrass to be the greatest thing that happened in his life. As for that famous leap in the lake, as Jerry Pate remembers it, Dye was grateful for that too.
Pete later on told me, he said, you know, I think the greatest thing that happened in my career was you throwing me in the lake. I said, are you serious? He said, no. He said, that got me so much publicity.
In 2008, Dye became the 5th designer inducted into the World Golf Hall of Fame. He died in 2020 at the age of 94. His ashes were spread on the 8th hole at Casa de Campo in a ceremony that included his good friend, Jerry Pate.
Pensacola's Jerry Pate is the winner of the inaugural Tournament Players Championship at the Tournament Players Club.
The 1982 players seemed like a certain springboard to greater things for Pate.
3 months later, I was hitting some golf shots, tore my shoulder, and that kind of ended my career.
Pate never won on tour again. To this day, he considers the 5-iron he played into the final hole in 1982 to be the favorite shot of his entire career.
But that was really the start of my fame and the end of my career. Isn't that crazy?
Each Christmas, Pate has a standing phone call with his good friend Dean Beeman, the man who looked beyond what was and dared to imagine what could be. He defied everyone who doubted him and realized his vision to build a permanent home for the PGA Tour's flagship event. Inside the clubhouse at TPC Sawgrass, one symbolic conquest is on display for all to see, a crisp $100 bill, courtesy of the developer who famously bet Beeman that he would never build his golf course. It sits neatly in a framed plaque and hangs proudly on the wall, accompanied by an inscription that says, "To Dean Beeman, the man who did what we said couldn't be done." The Making of the Players was written and edited by Dominic Dastoli. The senior producer of PGA Tour Radio is Christy Hugick. The executive producer is Justin Ware. The program director is Jeremy Davis. Special thanks to Josh Burns, the PGA Tour's media rights manager, and Adam Shupak, the author of Dean Beeman, Golf's Driving Force. I'm Craig Cann. Thanks for listening.